Marcus Thompson stood in front of his new house and smiled. The moving truck had just left and boxes filled every room. At 72 years old, he never thought he would move again. But here he was, starting fresh in Willowbrook Estates. The neighborhood looked perfect. Green lawns stretched in front of big houses. Tall trees lined the streets. Children rode bikes on the sidewalks. Everything seemed peaceful and clean. Marcus had worked hard his whole life to afford a place like this. He had served in the Army for 30 years. After that, he became a lawyer who helped people fight unfair treatment. Now he was retired and wanted to spend time with his family. His daughter Lisa lived just 10 minutes away with her husband and 2 kids. Marcus wanted to be the grandfather who was always there for soccer games and birthday parties. The house was bigger than anything Marcus had ever owned. It had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a big backyard. The kitchen was modern with new appliances. The living room had large windows that let in lots of light. Marcus felt proud as he walked through his new home. His neighbor to the right came over to introduce himself. The man was about 50 years old with gray hair and a friendly smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood," the man said. "I'm Tom Bradley. I live right next door with my wife and daughter." Marcus shook his hand. "Nice to meet you, Tom. I'm Marcus Thompson." "Where did you move from?" Tom asked. "I lived downtown for the past 20 years, Marcus said. "But I wanted to be closer to my daughter and grandkids." Tom nodded. "That's great. This is a good place for families, very quiet and safe. The schools are excellent too." They talked for a few more minutes. Tom seemed genuinely nice. He offered to help Marcus if he needed anything. Before leaving, Tom mentioned the Homeowners Association. "Just so you know, we have an HOA here," Tom said. "They keep the neighborhood looking nice. There are some rules about lawn care and house colors. Nothing too crazy." Marcus thanked him for the information. He had lived in places with HOAs before. Usually, they just made sure people kept their yards clean and didn't paint their houses bright purple. The next morning, Marcus drove around the neighborhood to get familiar with it. The streets were named after trees: Oak Lane, Maple Drive, Pine Street. Most houses looked similar, but not exactly the same. Some were brick, others had vinyl siding. The colors were mostly white, beige, and light gray. As he drove, Marcus noticed something. He saw very few people who looked like him. In fact, he only saw one other black family. They were working in their garden when he drove by. Marcus made a mental note to introduce himself later. He also noticed that many people seemed to know each other well. Neighbors talked over fences. Kids played together in front yards. Some people waved at Marcus as he drove by, but others just stared. Marcus had experienced this before. Being one of the few black people in a mostly white neighborhood was nothing new. In the Army, he was often the only black officer in his unit. As a lawyer, he was usually the only black person in the courtroom. He had learned how to handle uncomfortable situations with grace and confidence. That afternoon, his daughter Lisa came over with her kids. 8-year-old Marcus Jr. and 6-year-old Sophia ran straight to the backyard to explore. Lisa hugged her father. "Dad, this place is amazing," she said. "The kids are going to love coming here." Marcus smiled. "That's the whole point. I want them to have space to play and good memories of their grandfather's house." Lisa was mixed race. Her mother had been white and she had passed away 5 years ago. Lisa's husband, James, was also mixed race. Their children had light brown skin and curly hair. Marcus loved his family exactly as they were, but he knew some people might have problems with a mixed-race family. "Have you met any neighbors yet?" Lisa asked. "Just one. Tom next door seems nice. I need to meet more people." As they talked, Marcus noticed a white SUV driving slowly past his house. The driver looked at his house for a long time before driving away. 20 minutes later, the same SUV came back and did the same thing. "That's odd," Marcus thought. But he didn't say anything to Lisa. No point in worrying her about something that might be nothing. That evening, Marcus unpacked boxes in his living room. He put up pictures of his family and his military awards. He arranged his law books on the shelves. This house was starting to feel like home. Around 8 o'clock, his doorbell rang. Marcus opened the door to find a man in his 60s standing on his porch. The man was tall and thin with white hair. He wore a polo shirt and khaki pants. His expression was serious. "Are you the new owner?" the man asked without introducing himself. "Yes, I'm Marcus Thompson," Marcus said, extending his hand. The man looked at Marcus's hand but didn't shake it. "I'm Dale Morrison. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association here." Marcus put his hand down. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Morrison. I just moved in yesterday." Morrison looked past Marcus into the house. "I wanted to welcome you to Willowbrook Estates and make sure you understand our community standards." "Of course," Marcus said. "My neighbor Tom mentioned there were some rules." Morrison pulled out a thick folder. "This contains our HOA guidelines. I suggest you read them carefully. We work hard to maintain property values here. Everyone needs to follow the rules exactly." Marcus took the folder. It felt heavy in his hands. "I'll look through this tonight." "Good," Morrison said. "We have monthly meetings on the first Tuesday of each month. Attendance is strongly encouraged." Morrison turned to leave, then stopped.
"One more thing."
"We've had some issues with people not understanding how things work here. I hope that won't be a problem." Marcus felt a chill in Morrison's words, but he kept his voice calm. "I'm sure there won't be any problems. Mr. Morrison, I respect rules and community standards." Morrison nodded and walked away without saying goodbye. Marcus closed the door and looked at the thick folder in his hands. Something about Morrison felt wrong, but Marcus couldn't put his finger on it. Maybe the man was just very serious about HOA rules. Time would tell. That night, Marcus read through the HOA guidelines. There were rules about everything: lawn height, house colors, fence styles, where to park cars, and even what kind of mailboxes were allowed. Some rules seemed reasonable, but others felt overly strict. As he read, Marcus remembered Morrison's comment about people not understanding how things work here. The more he thought about it, the more uncomfortable those words made him feel. But Marcus had faced difficult situations before. He was a strong man who had fought for his country and fought for justice in courtrooms. If there were problems in this neighborhood, he would handle them the same way he always had, with dignity, intelligence, and strength. Marcus finished reading and went to bed in his new house. Tomorrow he would start learning more about his new community. He hoped for the best, but prepared himself for whatever might come. Marcus had been living in Willowbrook Estates for exactly 2 weeks when the first letter arrived. He found it taped to his front door when he came back from the grocery store. The envelope had HOA violation notice printed in red letters across the top. Marcus opened it and read the contents. According to the notice, his mailbox was non-compliant with community standards. The letter said his mailbox was painted black, but the approved color was charcoal gray. Marcus walked to his mailbox and looked at it closely. It looked exactly like every other mailbox on his street. The violation notice said he had 7 days to fix the problem, or face a $50 fine. Marcus shook his head. This seemed ridiculous, but he didn't want trouble. The next day, he went to the hardware store and bought charcoal gray paint. He painted his mailbox even though he couldn't see any difference between the old color and the new one. 3 days later, another notice appeared on his door. This time, the HOA complained about his garden gnome. Marcus had placed a small ceramic gnome next to his front steps. The notice said garden gnomes violated the aesthetic standards of the community. Marcus walked around the neighborhood that evening. He counted at least 6 other garden gnomes in front yards. He also saw plastic flamingos, decorative windmills, and colorful flower arrangements. None of these other decorations seemed to bother the HOA, but Marcus removed his gnome anyway. He was starting to see a pattern, but he wanted to give the HOA the benefit of the doubt. The third violation notice came a week later. This one really made Marcus angry. The HOA claimed his American flag was hung improperly. Marcus had served his country for 30 years. He knew exactly how to display the American flag. He had hung it correctly on a pole in his front yard, just like he had done at every house he had ever lived in. Marcus decided it was time to attend an HOA meeting. The next meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening at the community center. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early and took a seat in the back row. The community center was a nice building with a large meeting room. About 40 people attended the meeting. Marcus looked around and realized he was the only black person in the room. This didn't surprise him, but it did make him more aware of how people looked at him when he walked in. Dale Morrison ran the meeting from a table at the front of the room. He was flanked by 4 other board members. Morrison introduced them one by one. Marcus paid close attention to their backgrounds. Jim Jenkins was the vice president. Morrison said Jenkins had been a police officer for 25 years before retiring. He was a big man with thick arms and a stern face. When Morrison introduced him, Jenkins nodded seriously at the crowd. Carlos Rodriguez was the treasurer. He had also been a police officer and worked in the sheriff's department for 30 years. Rodriguez was shorter than Jenkins but looked just as tough. He wore a baseball cap and kept his arms crossed during most of the meeting. The secretary was Betty Walsh. She was the only woman on the board and the only member who hadn't been in law enforcement. Walsh seemed nervous and rarely spoke during the meeting. The fifth board member was Frank Cooper, who Morrison called their enforcement coordinator. Cooper had been a state trooper for 20 years. He was responsible for driving around the neighborhood and noting violations. Morrison stood up to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an important job here in Willowbrook Estates. We must maintain the high standards that make this community special. Property values depend on everyone following the rules exactly." Marcus listened as Morrison talked about maintaining standards and protecting our investment. The more Morrison spoke, the more Marcus understood what kind of man he was dealing with. Morrison used phrases like certain types of people and keeping our community safe. He never said anything directly racist, but his meaning was clear. "We've noticed some new residents who don't seem to understand our expectations," Morrison continued. "It's important that everyone learns how things work here. This isn't the kind of neighborhood where people can do whatever they want." Marcus felt Morrison's eyes on him when he said this. Several other people in the room also turned to look at Marcus. He kept his expression calm and took notes on everything Morrison said. Jenkins spoke next about security concerns. He said the board was working to keep undesirable elements out of the neighborhood. Rodriguez nodded along and mentioned that they were all experienced in law enforcement and knew how to spot trouble. The meeting lasted an hour. Most of it focused on complaints about various homeowners. Marcus was shocked by how many violation notices the board had issued. They had fined people for parking in their own driveways the wrong way, for having flowers that were too colorful, and for children's toys being visible in yards. Marcus noticed something else interesting. All the people being fined seemed to be minorities or families with young children. The board never mentioned violations by older white residents, even though Marcus had seen plenty of rule-breaking during his walks around the neighborhood. After the meeting, Marcus approached Morrison. He wanted to ask about his own violation notices in person. "Mr. Morrison," Marcus said politely, "I'm Marcus Thompson. I received some violation notices and wanted to discuss them with you." Morrison looked at Marcus coldly. "What about them?" "Well, I corrected the mailbox issue even though I couldn't see the color difference. I removed my garden gnome, although I noticed several others in the neighborhood. But I'm confused about the flag violation. I displayed my flag according to proper military protocol." Jenkins and Rodriguez had moved closer during this conversation. Marcus felt like they were trying to intimidate him by standing too close. "Mr. Thompson," Morrison said slowly, "the rules apply to everyone equally. If you received a violation notice, it's because you violated a rule. It's that simple." "I understand that," Marcus replied. "I'm just asking for clarification about the flag issue specifically." Rodriguez stepped even closer. "Are you questioning the board's authority?" Marcus looked Rodriguez in the eye. "I'm asking for information about community standards." "That seems reasonable." Jenkins joined the conversation. "Maybe you're not used to living in a quality neighborhood like this. Some people need time to adjust to higher standards." Marcus felt his anger rising, but he kept his voice calm. "I've lived in many different neighborhoods over the years. I've never had trouble following reasonable rules." Morrison smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Well, Mr. Thompson, I hope you'll learn to fit in here. It would be unfortunate if someone felt uncomfortable in our community." The three men stood there looking at Marcus. The threat in Morrison's words was clear. Marcus understood that this wasn't really about mailbox colors or garden gnomes. This was about three former cops who didn't want a black man living in their neighborhood. But Marcus wasn't going anywhere. He had paid for his house with money he earned through decades of hard work. He had every right to live there, and he wasn't going to be bullied by a few racist retirees. "I'm sure we'll all get along just fine," Marcus said calmly. "Have a good evening, gentlemen." Marcus walked out of the community center with his head held high. Behind him, he could hear Morrison, Jenkins, and Rodriguez talking in low voices. He didn't need to hear their words to know they were planning something. That night, Marcus sat in his living room and thought about his situation. He had dealt with racism his entire life, but it had usually been more subtle than this. These three men weren't even trying to hide their intentions. Marcus had two choices. He could keep his head down follow every rule perfectly and hope they would leave him alone. Or he could fight back. After 30 years in the military and 20 years as a civil rights lawyer, Marcus knew which choice he would make. He opened his laptop and started a new document. If Morrison and his friends wanted to play games, Marcus would show them how a real professional handled conflict. He began documenting everything. Every violation notice, every conversation, every detail about the HOA meeting. Marcus had learned long ago that preparation was the key to winning any battle. These former cops thought they could intimidate him because they were used to people being afraid of them. But Marcus wasn't afraid. He was ready for whatever came next. The harassment began the day after the HOA meeting. Marcus first noticed it when he left for his morning walk. A white SUV sat parked across the street from his house. Behind the wheel was Frank Cooper, the HOA's enforcement coordinator. Cooper stared directly at Marcus as he walked down his driveway. Marcus waved politely at Cooper, but the man didn't wave back. Instead, Cooper picked up a notebook and wrote something down. Then he started his SUV and drove slowly behind Marcus as he walked through the neighborhood. This felt wrong to Marcus. He had been walking the same route every morning for 3 weeks. Now suddenly the HOA was following him? Marcus kept walking at his normal pace, but he made mental notes of everything Cooper did. When Marcus returned home 30 minutes later, Cooper was parked in front of his house again. The man sat there for another hour before driving away. The next morning, the same thing happened. Cooper was waiting when Marcus came outside. This time, Jim Jenkins was with him in a different car. The two men followed Marcus during his entire walk, staying about 50 feet behind him. Marcus began to understand what was happening. Morrison and his friends were trying to make him feel uncomfortable in his own neighborhood. They wanted him to know he was being watched at all times, but their plan backfired. Instead of feeling scared, Marcus felt motivated. These men were clearly violating his rights, and he was going to document everything they did. Marcus bought a small notebook and started recording the harassment. Every time he saw Cooper, Jenkins, or Rodriguez, he wrote down the time, location, and what they were doing. Within a week, he had pages of entries. Day 8, Cooper parked outside. My house from 7:15 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. took photos of my car in my driveway. Day 10, Jenkins and Rodriguez drove past my house 6 times between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. while my grandchildren were playing in the yard. Day 12, Cooper followed me to the grocery store and sat in the parking lot while I shopped. The violation notices also increased. Marcus received complaints about everything imaginable. His grass was too long at 2.5 inches, even though the rules allowed grass up to 3 inches. His newspaper was left in his driveway too long because he didn't pick it up before 8 a.m. on Sunday mornings. One notice claimed his house number was improperly displayed. Marcus looked at his house numbers, which were exactly the same style and size as every other house on his street. Another notice said his garbage cans were visible from the street on a Thursday, even though trash pickup was on Friday mornings. Marcus paid careful attention to his neighbors' properties. He took photos of other houses that had the same violations. He was being cited for. Mrs. Peterson, 3 houses down, had grass that was clearly longer than his. Mr. Adams across the street left his garbage cans out for days after pickup. None of these people received violation notices. The harassment reached a new level when Marcus's daughter came to visit with her children. Lisa arrived on a Saturday afternoon with 8-year-old Marcus Jr. and 6-year-old Sophia. The kids immediately ran to the backyard to play on the swing set Marcus had installed for them. Within minutes, Cooper's SUV appeared on the street. He parked where he could see the backyard and sat there watching the children play. Lisa noticed immediately. "Dad, why is that man watching us?" she asked. Marcus looked out the window at Cooper. "He's part of the HOA. They've been keeping an eye on me since I moved in." Lisa frowned. "That doesn't seem normal. HOAs don't usually spy on homeowners." "No, they don't," Marcus agreed. "But these men aren't normal HOA board members." 20 minutes later, Jenkins arrived in his pickup truck. He parked next to Cooper, and the two men sat there together, both staring at Marcus's backyard where mixed-race children were playing with their black grandfather. Marcus felt his anger building, but he controlled it. Getting emotional wouldn't help the situation. Instead, he went to his laptop and continued documenting everything. That evening, after Lisa and the kids left, Marcus received a phone call from Morrison. "Mr. Thompson, this is Dale Morrison from the HOA. We received a complaint about excessive noise from your property today. Marcus looked at his notes. Lisa and the kids had left an hour ago. What kind of noise complaint, Mr. Morrison? Children screaming and yelling. Some neighbors were disturbed by the commotion. Marcus almost laughed. His grandchildren had been playing quietly in his backyard during the middle of the afternoon. They had laughed and talked, but they certainly hadn't been screaming. Mr. Morrison, my grandchildren were playing in my backyard between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. today. They were not making excessive noise. Well, we received a complaint, Morrison said firmly. I'm just letting you know that we expect all residents to be considerate of their neighbors. Who made the complaint? Marcus asked. That information is confidential. What specific noise ordinance was violated? Morrison paused. Mr. Thompson, are you questioning the board's authority again? I'm asking for information about the specific rule that was broken. That seems like a reasonable request. Just keep the noise down in the future, Morrison said and hung up. Marcus looked at his phone and shook his head. These men weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. They were making up complaints just to harass him. The next week brought even more problems. Marcus received a violation notice for parking his car incorrectly in his own driveway. The notice said his car was supposed to be parked with the front facing the street, not the back. Marcus had never heard of such a rule, and he couldn't find it anywhere in the HOA guidelines. He spent an entire evening walking through the neighborhood, counting how many cars were parked incorrectly. He found 37 cars parked the same way as his. None of those homeowners received violation notices. Marcus also received a complaint about his unauthorized landscaping. He had planted some flowers along his front walkway. The flowers were the same type many other homeowners had, but apparently Marcus needed prior approval for any landscaping changes. The harassment wasn't limited to official HOA business. Cooper, Jenkins, and Rodriguez made their presence known whenever Marcus left his house. They drove past his home multiple times every day. They followed him to the bank, the grocery store, and the post office. One afternoon, Marcus was working in his front yard when Rodriguez pulled up and parked across the street. The man sat in his car for 2 hours just watching Marcus pull weeds and water his flowers. When Marcus waved at him, Rodriguez wrote something in his notebook. Marcus's neighbor Tom Bradley noticed what was happening. He came over while Marcus was working in his garden. Marcus, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what's going on with those guys? Tom pointed at Rodriguez sitting in his car. They're HOA board members. They seem very interested in making sure I follow all the rules. Tom looked confused. I've lived here for 8 years and I've never seen anything like this. The HOA usually just sends letters if there's a problem. Well, I guess I'm special, Marcus said with a smile. Tom lowered his voice. Look, I don't want to get involved in neighborhood politics, but this doesn't seem right. Those guys were all cops and they act like they're still on the job. Marcus stopped working and looked at Tom. What do you mean? They patrol the neighborhood like they're looking for criminals. Morrison especially thinks he's still a police captain. A lot of people are afraid to say anything because they don't want trouble. This information confirmed what Marcus already suspected. Morrison and his friends were using their HOA positions to control the neighborhood the same way they had controlled people as police officers. That night, Marcus reviewed all his documentation. He had detailed records of every violation notice, every incident of harassment, and every intimidation attempt. The pattern was clear and undeniable. Marcus had dealt with bullies before, both in the military and in his law practice. He knew that bullies usually escalated their behavior when their initial tactics didn't work. Morrison and his friends were getting frustrated because Marcus wasn't backing down. Marcus prepared himself for whatever came next. He upgraded his home security system and installed cameras around his property. He made copies of all his documentation and stored them in multiple places. He also reached out to some of his old contacts in the legal community. If Morrison wanted to play hardball, Marcus was ready. But he suspected these former cops had no idea who they were really dealing with. They saw an elderly black man and assumed he would be easy to intimidate. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The confrontation Marcus had been expecting finally came on a warm Saturday afternoon in June. Marcus was hosting a family barbecue in his backyard. His daughter Lisa was there with her husband James and their 2 children. His son David had driven in from the next city with his wife and teenage daughter. About 12 family members were enjoying food, music, and conversation in Marcus's backyard. The gathering was everything Marcus had hoped for when he moved to Willowbrook Estates. His grandchildren were playing games on the lawn. The adults were relaxing in lawn chairs, talking and laughing. Marcus stood at his grill, cooking hamburgers and hot dogs, feeling happy and content. It was 3:15 in the afternoon when Marcus noticed the white SUV pull up across the street. Frank Cooper sat behind the wheel, staring at the backyard party. Marcus had grown used to Cooper's surveillance, but today felt different. Cooper seemed more focused, more aggressive in his watching. 15 minutes later, Jim Jenkins arrived in his pickup truck. He parked next to Cooper, and the two men sat there together, both clearly watching Marcus's family gathering. Marcus's daughter Lisa noticed the men and moved closer to her father. "Dad, those guys are back again. This is getting really weird." Marcus flipped a burger and kept his voice calm. "I know, sweetheart. Just ignore them and enjoy the party." But Marcus was paying close attention to Cooper and Jenkins. In his peripheral vision, he could see them talking to each other and pointing at his backyard. Something was building, and Marcus could feel it. At 3:45, a third vehicle arrived. Carlos Rodriguez pulled up in a black sedan and parked behind the other two cars. Now all three former cops were sitting across the street, watching Marcus's family barbecue. Marcus's son, David, walked over to the grill. "Dad, what's the deal with those guys?" "They've been staring at us for half an hour. They're HOA board members," Marcus explained quietly. "They don't seem to like me very much." David looked angry. "This is harassment, Dad. You should call the police." Marcus almost laughed. "Son, those men are the police. Or they used to be. Calling the cops on former cops probably won't help much." At exactly 4:00 p.m., the three men got out of their vehicles and started walking toward Marcus's house. They moved with purpose, like they had planned this moment. Marcus watched them approach and felt his military training kick in. He assessed the situation quickly. 3 men, all larger than him, all with law enforcement backgrounds. They were coming onto his property uninvited while his family was present. This was escalation, and Marcus needed to be ready for anything. "Lisa, take the kids inside," Marcus said quietly. "Dad, what's happening?" "Just do it, honey. Take everyone inside except David and James." Lisa looked scared, but she did what her father asked. She gathered the children and the other women and moved them into the house. David and James stayed in the backyard with Marcus, both men looking tense. Morrison, Jenkins, and Rodriguez walked around Marcus's house and entered his backyard through the gate. They didn't knock on the front door or ask permission. They just walked onto his private property like they owned it. Marcus turned off his grill and faced the 3 men. He kept his hands visible and his voice calm. "Gentlemen, this is private property. What can I do for you?" Morrison stepped forward as the leader. "We received a noise complaint about this gathering. We're here to investigate." Marcus looked at his watch. "It's 4 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. We're having a quiet family barbecue in my backyard." "What noise complaint?" Jenkins moved to Marcus's left side while Rodriguez moved to his right. Marcus recognized the formation immediately. It was a classic police intimidation tactic designed to make a suspect feel surrounded and powerless. "The complaint says there's been loud music and shouting," Morrison said. "Some neighbors are trying to enjoy a peaceful Saturday." Marcus gestured toward his small Bluetooth speaker, which was playing soft jazz music at low volume. "As you can see, our music is barely audible, and we're having normal conversations, not shouting." Rodriguez stepped closer to Marcus. "Are you calling us liars, old man?" The insult was clearly intended to provoke Marcus into an angry response. But Marcus had been dealing with racist intimidation tactics since before these men were born. He wasn't going to take the bait. "I'm saying there's no noise violation here," Marcus replied calmly. "If you have a specific ordinance that's being broken, I'd like to see it in writing." Jenkins laughed mockingly. "Listen to this guy. He thinks he's a lawyer or something." "Actually, I am a lawyer," Marcus said. "I practiced civil rights law for 20 years before retiring." The 3 men exchanged glances. Morrison's confidence seemed to waver slightly, but he pressed forward. "Well, lawyer or not, you need to follow the rules in this neighborhood. Some people need to learn how things work around here." David stepped closer to his father. "How exactly do things work around here?" Morrison looked at David with contempt. "Who are you?" "I'm his son, and I'm wondering why 3 grown men feel the need to come onto private property to harass my family." Rodriguez moved even closer to Marcus, now standing just 2 feet away. "Your family is making too much noise. We're telling you to quiet down." Marcus could smell alcohol on Rodriguez's breath. The man had been drinking, which made him even more unpredictable. Marcus remained calm but prepared himself for physical confrontation. "Mr. Rodriguez, you're standing very close to me. Are you trying to intimidate me? I'm standing wherever I want to stand," Rodriguez replied aggressively. Jenkins stepped forward too, creating a triangle around Marcus. "Maybe you don't understand the situation here, Thompson. This is a quality neighborhood. We don't tolerate certain types of behavior." Marcus felt his anger rising, but he controlled it. These men were trying to provoke him into doing something that would give them an excuse to call the real police or even attack him. "What type of behavior are you referring to, Mr. Jenkins?" Morrison answered instead. "The type of behavior we've been seeing from you since you moved here. Questioning authority, refusing to follow simple rules, bringing the wrong kind of people into our neighborhood." The racist implications in Morrison's words were clear to everyone present. David and James both tensed up, ready to defend Marcus if the situation turned physical. "The wrong kind of people?" Marcus asked. "You mean my family?" "I mean people who don't fit in here," Morrison said. "People who don't understand what kind of community this is." Rodriguez was now close enough to touch Marcus. "Maybe you'd be happier somewhere else, old man. Somewhere more suitable for your kind." Marcus looked Rodriguez directly in the eyes. "My kind? You know what I mean." Marcus did know what he meant. After 72 years of life, 30 years in the military, and 20 years fighting discrimination cases, Marcus understood exactly what Rodriguez meant. But these three former cops had made a critical mistake. They thought they were dealing with someone who would be intimidated by their size, their numbers, and their former authority. They expected Marcus to back down, apologize, and promise to behave in the future. They had no idea that Marcus Thompson had spent his entire life preparing for this exact moment. He had faced down racist officers in the army, racist judges in courtrooms, and racist officials in government buildings. 3 retired cops in a suburban backyard were nothing compared to what he had already survived. Marcus reached into his pocket slowly, making sure his movements were visible to everyone. The 3 men tensed, probably expecting him to pull out a weapon or try to call for help. Instead, Marcus pulled out his smartphone. "Gentlemen," Marcus said with a calm smile, "I think it's time we had a real conversation about what's happening here. Morrison, Jenkins, and Rodriguez had no idea what Marcus was about to do, but they were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous weapon an intelligent man can carry is a cell phone and the knowledge of how to use it." Marcus held his smartphone up so all 3 men could see it clearly. With one finger, he opened his Facebook app and started a live video stream. Within seconds, a red live indicator appeared on his screen. "Good afternoon, everyone," Marcus said to his phone in a clear, professional voice. "My name is Marcus Thompson, and I'm broadcasting live from my backyard in Willowbrook Estates. I'm here with 3 members of our homeowners association who have just entered my private property uninvited." Morrison, Jenkins, and Rodriguez looked confused and suddenly uncomfortable. They had expected Marcus to either back down or get angry. They weren't prepared for him to calmly start broadcasting their confrontation to the world. Marcus turned the phone so the camera captured all 3 men's faces. "Let me introduce you to Dale Morrison, the HOA president and former police captain. Next to him is Jim Jenkins, the vice president and former police officer. And this is Carlos Rodriguez, the treasurer and former sheriff's deputy." Rodriguez stepped back from Marcus. "What are you doing?" "Turn that thing off." "I'm documenting this conversation," Marcus replied calmly. "As a lawyer, I believe in creating clear records of important interactions." Marcus looked at his phone screen and saw that 12 people were already watching his live stream. The number was growing quickly. "Now, gentlemen," Marcus continued, "you mentioned a noise complaint. Could you please tell my viewers exactly what noise ordinance we're violating at 4 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon?" Morrison looked angry and flustered. "Turn off that camera right now." "Actually, I'm on my own property, so I have every right to record what happens here," Marcus said. "But please answer the question. What specific rule are we breaking?" Jenkins stepped forward aggressively. "We don't have to answer your questions." Marcus smiled at the camera. "That's Jim Jenkins, everyone. He seems upset that I'm asking for details about the noise complaint. Mr. Jenkins, could you point out the loud music or shouting that prompted this visit?" Marcus slowly turned his phone to show his backyard. The Bluetooth speaker was clearly visible, playing soft jazz at low volume. His family members were standing quietly near the house, watching the confrontation with concern. "As you can see," Marcus said to his audience, "this is a very quiet family gathering. But Mr. Rodriguez here told me we're making too much noise. Mr. Rodriguez, would you like to explain to my viewers what exactly is too loud?" Rodriguez looked panicked. "I'm not talking to your stupid camera." "That's unfortunate," Marcus said, "because Mr. Rodriguez also told me that my family consists of the wrong kind of people for this neighborhood. I'm sure my viewers would love to hear him explain what he meant by that." The viewer count on his live stream had jumped to 47 people. Comments were starting to appear on his screen, and Marcus could see that people were sharing his video. Morrison tried to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Thompson, you're creating a disturbance. We came here to address a legitimate complaint." "Excellent point, Mr. Morrison," Marcus said to the camera. "Let me ask you some legal questions about this complaint. First, who filed the complaint?" "That's confidential information." "I see. And what time was this complaint filed?" Morrison hesitated. "Earlier today. Could you be more specific?" "Was it before or after you three gentlemen parked across the street to watch my family barbecue?" Morrison's face turned red. He clearly hadn't expected Marcus to ask such precise questions. Marcus continued his professional questioning. "Mr. Morrison, as the HOA president, are you authorized to enter private property without permission to investigate noise complaints?" "We have authority to enforce HOA rules." "That's interesting. Could you show me the section of our HOA bylaws that gives you authority to enter private property uninvited?" Morrison looked flustered. "We don't need to show you anything." Marcus smiled at his phone. "Viewers, Mr. Morrison claims he has authority but refuses to cite the specific rule that grants him that authority. As a retired lawyer, I find that very curious." The viewer count was now over 100 people. Comments were flooding in, with people expressing outrage at what they were seeing. Jenkins was getting angrier. "Stop playing games, Thompson. Just do what we're telling you to do." Marcus turned to face Jenkins directly. "Mr. Jenkins, are you ordering me to do something on my own property?" "I'm telling you to show some respect." "Respect for what exactly?" "Your former positions as police officers?" Rodriguez stepped forward again, clearly frustrated. "Listen, old man." "Mr. Rodriguez," Marcus interrupted, "you keep calling me old man. Is that how HOA board members typically address homeowners?" Marcus turned back to his phone. "Viewers, Mr. Rodriguez has called me old man several times during this conversation. He's also suggested that my family doesn't belong in this neighborhood. I'm starting to wonder if this is really about a noise complaint." Morrison finally realized how bad this looked on camera. "We're done here. Turn off that camera." "Actually, Mr. Morrison, we're just getting started," Marcus said. "I have some important questions about HOA enforcement in our community." Marcus pulled out his notebook with his free hand. "Mr. Morrison, according to my records, I've received 14 violation notices in the past 6 weeks. Could you tell my viewers how many violation notices you've sent to my neighbors during the same period?" Morrison didn't answer. "That's okay, I'll answer for you. According to my research, you've sent 0 violation notices to any of my white neighbors, despite numerous violations that I've documented." Marcus opened his notebook and read from it. For example, Mrs. Peterson at 242 Oak Lane has grass that's been over 4 inches tall for 3 weeks. Mr. Adams at 156 Oak Lane has left his garbage cans out for 5 days after pickup. The Johnson family at 203 Oak Lane has had a broken fence for 2 months. None of these people have received violation notices. Rodriguez looked nervous. "How do you know all that?" "Because I'm a careful person, Mr. Rodriguez. I document everything." Marcus turned to the camera again. "Viewers, let me share some statistics with you. Willowbrook Estates has 200 homes. 3 of those homes are owned by black families. Guess which 3 homeowners have received 95% of all violation notices this year?" The viewer count was now over 200 people. The comments section was exploding with angry reactions and people asking for the location of the neighborhood. Morrison made one last attempt to control the situation. "Mr. Thompson, you're being unreasonable. We're just trying to maintain community standards." "Community standards?" Marcus asked. "Mr. Morrison, could you explain why your idea of community standards seems to only apply to minority homeowners?" Morrison's face was bright red now. "That's not true. Really? Then why have you and your colleagues been following me around the neighborhood for weeks? Why do you park outside my house and watch my family? Why did you enter my property uninvited during a peaceful family gathering? Jenkins stepped toward Marcus threateningly. "You better watch yourself, Thompson." Marcus turned the camera to capture Jenkins clearly. "Viewers, Mr. Jenkins just threatened me. He said I better watch myself." "Is that how HOA board members typically communicate with homeowners?" Rodriguez grabbed Jenkins's arm. "Jim, shut up. We need to get out of here." But Marcus wasn't finished. "Before you gentlemen leave, I want to make something very clear to my viewers. This conversation represents everything that's wrong with how some people abuse positions of power." Marcus looked directly at Morrison. "Mr. Morrison, you and your friends seem to think that your former positions as police officers give you the right to intimidate and harass homeowners. You're wrong." He turned to Jenkins. "Mr. Jenkins, you seem to think that making threats will make me back down. You're wrong about that too." Finally, he faced Rodriguez. "And Mr. Rodriguez, you seem to think that calling me names and suggesting my family doesn't belong here will make us leave. You're very wrong about that." Marcus looked back at his phone. "Viewers, I want you to understand something important. I bought my home in this neighborhood with money I earned through 30 years of military service and 20 years as a civil rights lawyer. I have every right to live here peacefully with my family." The viewer count had reached 300 people. Marcus could see that people were sharing his video across social media platforms. "These three men have spent weeks trying to intimidate me into leaving. They've issued false violation notices, followed me around the neighborhood, and now they've entered my property uninvited to threaten my family." Marcus smiled confidently at the camera. "But they made one critical mistake. They assumed that because I'm a 72-year-old black man, I would be easy to push around. They forgot to ask about my background before they started this fight. Morrison, Jenkins, and Rodriguez were all backing toward the gate, clearly wanting to escape the situation. Gentlemen," Marcus called after them, "thank you for this enlightening conversation. My viewers and I have learned a lot about how you operate." As the three men hurried away, Marcus continued his live stream. "Viewers, this is just the beginning. Stay tuned because this story is about to get very interesting." Marcus ended his live video after 45 minutes. By that time, over 800 people had watched the confrontation, and the video had been shared dozens of times. Comments poured in from viewers expressing outrage and offering support. Many people asked for the location of Willowbrook Estates and the names of the HOA board members. Marcus saved the video and immediately uploaded it to YouTube with the title HOA. Former cops try to intimidate black homeowner. Watch what happens next. Within 2 hours, the video had 2,000 views. By the end of the weekend, it had reached 15,000 views. But the viral video was just the beginning of Marcus's response. He had spent his entire career as a lawyer preparing for battles like this one, and he knew that social media attention alone wouldn't solve his problem. He needed to take legal action. On Monday morning, Marcus drove to the law office of Sarah Chen, a civil rights attorney he had worked with in the past. Sarah was young, aggressive, and had a perfect record in discrimination cases. Marcus had mentored her when she was a new lawyer, and now he needed her help. "Marcus, I saw your video," Sarah said as soon as he walked into her office. "This is exactly the kind of case I live for." Marcus sat down and pulled out 3 thick folders. "I've been documenting everything for weeks. Violation notices, harassment incidents, witness statements from neighbors. I have enough evidence to bury these guys." Sarah looked through Marcus's documentation and whistled softly. "This is incredible work. You've built a stronger case than most lawyers could manage." Marcus opened the first folder. 14 violation notices in 6 weeks, all for infractions that are ignored when white homeowners commit them. "I have photographs proving selective enforcement." He opened the second folder. "Daily harassment and surveillance. I have a log of every time they followed me, watched my house, or intimidated my family members." The third folder contained witness statements. 5 neighbors have agreed to testify that the HOA has never enforced rules this aggressively against white homeowners. 2 of them are afraid to speak publicly because they don't want to become targets themselves. Sarah shook her head in amazement. "Marcus, this is a civil rights lawyer's dream case. You have everything we need. Clear evidence of discriminatory enforcement, witness testimony, documentation of harassment, and video proof of intimidation." Marcus leaned forward. "Sarah, I want to hit them with everything we've got. Civil rights violations, harassment, intimidation, abuse of power. I want damages for emotional distress and punitive damages to make sure this never happens again." "What about the other minority families in the neighborhood? Have they experienced similar treatment?" Marcus nodded. I've talked to the Rodriguez family. Different Rodriguez, no relation to the HOA treasurer. They've gotten violation notices for things like children's toys being visible in their yard. The Kim family received complaints about foreign cooking smells coming from their house. Sarah's eyes lit up. This could be a class action lawsuit. Multiple families affected by the same discriminatory practices. Marcus pulled out another document. I've also been researching Morrison, Jenkins, and the other Rodriguez. All three have histories of complaints during their police careers. Morrison was investigated twice for excessive force. Jenkins was sued for racial profiling. Rodriguez was reprimanded for inappropriate conduct toward minority suspects. How did you get access to their personnel records? Marcus smiled. 20 years as a civil rights lawyer teaches you how to find information. I have contacts in law enforcement who were happy to share what they knew about these three. Sarah started taking notes. This keeps getting better. A pattern of discriminatory behavior that extends beyond their HOA activities. Marcus had more. I've also found evidence that they've been coordinating their harassment. I have text messages between Morrison and Jenkins discussing the Thompson problem and strategies to encourage him to move. How did you get their text messages? I didn't, but I have screenshots that were sent to me by someone who knows one of their wives. Apparently these guys aren't as careful as they think they are. Sarah was practically bouncing in her chair. Marcus, this is the kind of case that makes headlines. We're not just talking about HOA violations anymore. This is systematic harassment, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to deprive you of your rights. Marcus's expression became serious. Sarah, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about me getting justice. This is about making sure no other family has to go through what mine has experienced. I understand completely. This case could set a precedent that protects homeowners across the country. Marcus stood up and walked to the window. These men think they can use their former authority as police officers to control and intimidate people. They're wrong, and I'm going to prove it. Sarah joined him at the window. What's our timeline? I want to file within 48 hours. The video is still viral, the evidence is fresh, and I want to strike while we have momentum. Sarah nodded. I'll start drafting the complaint tonight. We're going to sue them individually and in their official capacities. Morrison, Jenkins, Rodriguez, and the HOA itself. Marcus handed her a business card. I've also contacted Channel 7 News. They want to do a story about the case. The reporter, Janet Martinez, has won awards for her investigations into housing discrimination. Perfect. Media pressure will help us negotiate a better settlement. Marcus shook his head. Sarah, I don't want a settlement. I want a trial. I want these men to face a jury and explain their actions in open court. Sarah looked surprised. Marcus, trials are risky. Even with strong evidence, juries can be unpredictable. I spent 30 years in the military fighting for this country's values. I spent 20 years as a lawyer fighting for justice. I'm not going to settle quietly and let these men continue harassing other families. Sarah smiled. Okay, we go to trial. But first we need to file for an emergency restraining order to stop their harassment. Marcus pulled out yet another folder. Already prepared. I have documented evidence of ongoing harassment that poses a threat to my family's safety. Rodriguez was drinking when he confronted me on Saturday, and Jenkins made verbal threats. You really have thought of everything. Marcus sat back down. Sarah, these men made a fundamental mistake. They assumed I was just an old black man who would be easy to intimidate. They never bothered to research my background or my capabilities. Sarah looked at all the folders and documents spread across her desk. They definitely underestimated you. Marcus's phone buzzed with a notification. He looked at the screen and smiled. The YouTube video just hit 25,000 views. Comments are coming in from all over the country. What are people saying? Marcus scrolled through the comments. Mostly supportive. People sharing their own experiences with HOA discrimination. Some lawyers offering to help pro bono. A few news outlets asking for interviews. Sarah's phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and frowned. This is interesting. It's the law firm that represents the Willowbrook Estates HOA. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Answer it. Let's hear what they have to say. Sarah put the call on speaker. Sarah Chen speaking. Ms. Chen, this is Robert Wilson from Wilson, Baker & Associates. We represent the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. We understand you're planning to file suit against our client. Sarah looked at Marcus, who nodded. We're considering legal action, yes. We'd like to discuss a resolution to this matter before any formal complaints are filed. Sarah smiled. What kind of resolution did you have in mind, Mr. Wilson? Perhaps we could arrange a meeting to discuss Mr. Thompson's concerns. I'm sure we can work something out that's satisfactory to everyone. Marcus gestured for Sarah to mute the call. They're scared, he whispered. The video got their attention. Sarah unmuted the call. Mr. Wilson, my client has been systematically harassed and discriminated against for weeks. His concerns go far beyond anything that can be resolved in a simple meeting. Ms. Chen, I think you're overreacting. This is a simple HOA matter that got blown out of proportion. Marcus couldn't stay quiet anymore. Mr. Wilson, this is Marcus Thompson. Nothing about this situation is simple, and nothing has been blown out of proportion. Wilson's tone changed when he realized Marcus was listening. Mr. Thompson, I've reviewed the situation and I believe there may have been some misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? Marcus asked. 3 men entered my property uninvited, made racist comments, and threatened my family. What exactly was misunderstood? Perhaps we could arrange a formal apology and some changes to HOA procedures. Marcus looked at Sarah and shook his head. Mr. Wilson, apologies and procedure changes won't undo weeks of harassment and discrimination. We'll see you in court. Sarah ended the call and turned to Marcus. They're definitely worried. That was a panic call. Marcus stood up and gathered his folders. Good. They should be worried. This fight is just getting started. The news story aired 3 days later on Channel 7's evening broadcast. Reporter Janet Martinez had done her homework, interviewing Marcus, his neighbors, and legal experts about HOA discrimination. The segment was titled, Former Police Officers Accused of Systematic Harassment in Suburban Neighborhood. The story opened with clips from Marcus's viral video, showing Morrison, Jenkins, and Rodriguez confronting him in his backyard. Martinez's voice provided context as the video played. What you're seeing is the culmination of weeks of alleged harassment targeting Marcus Thompson, a retired military veteran and civil rights lawyer who moved to Willowbrook Estates 2 months ago. The news story included interviews with other minority homeowners in the neighborhood. The Kim family spoke about receiving complaints about cooking smells. The Rodriguez family discussed violation notices for their children's toys. All 3 families reported being watched and followed by the same HOA board members. Martinez interviewed legal expert Professor David Liu from the local law school. What we see in this case appears to be textbook discrimination, Liu explained. When HOA rules are selectively enforced based on race or ethnicity, that's a clear violation of federal civil rights laws. The story also revealed new information about the 3 HOA board members. Martinez had obtained records showing that Morrison had been investigated twice for excessive force during his police career. Jenkins had been sued for racial profiling, and Rodriguez had been reprimanded for inappropriate conduct. This pattern of behavior didn't start when these men became HOA board members, Martinez reported. It appears to have been consistent throughout their law enforcement careers. The news story included a brief statement from the HOA's lawyer, Robert Wilson, who said his clients deny any wrongdoing and believe the situation has been greatly exaggerated. However, Wilson declined to make any of the board members available for interviews. The story ended with Marcus speaking directly to the camera. I didn't move to Willowbrook Estates to start a fight, he said. I moved here to be close to my family and enjoy my retirement. But I won't be bullied or intimidated by anyone, regardless of their former profession. The news segment generated immediate reaction. The Channel 7 website crashed from traffic as people tried to watch the video online. The station's Facebook page received hundreds of comments, mostly supporting Marcus and criticizing the HOA board. More importantly for Marcus's case, other victims started coming forward. Martinez reported that her station had received calls from current and former residents of Willowbrook Estates, describing similar experiences with the HOA board. One caller was Patricia Williams, a black nurse who had moved out of Willowbrook Estates the previous year. She told Martinez that Morrison and his friends had made her life so difficult that she finally sold her house and moved to avoid the constant harassment. They found fault with everything I did, Williams said in a follow-up interview. My grass was always too long or too short. My car was parked wrong. My visitors stayed too late. It was obvious they didn't want me there. Another caller was Miguel Santos, a Latino teacher who still lived in the neighborhood. Santos had received numerous violation notices for minor infractions, while watching white neighbors commit the same violations without Consequences, I kept quiet because I was afraid they would make things worse for my family, Santos told Martinez. But seeing Mr. Thompson stand up to them gave me courage to speak out. The media attention put enormous pressure on the HOA and its insurance company. Within a week of the news story airing, Marcus received a call from Robert Wilson requesting an immediate meeting. Mr. Thompson, my clients are prepared to make a substantial offer to resolve this matter, Wilson said. Marcus met with Wilson and Sarah Chen at her law office. Wilson came with 2 assistants and a thick folder of documents. My clients are willing to offer $50,000 in damages, plus all current violation notices against Mr. Thompson will be rescinded, Wilson began. Sarah laughed. Mr. Wilson, that's insulting. Your clients have violated federal civil rights laws, engaged in systematic harassment, and damaged my client's reputation. Wilson looked nervous. What would you consider reasonable? Marcus leaned forward. Mr. Wilson, I told you before that this isn't about money. I want justice. What exactly does that mean? Sarah pulled out her own folder. Complete removal of Morrison, Jenkins, and Rodriguez from the HOA board. A federal monitor to oversee HOA activities for 5 years. Mandatory civil rights training for all board members. And yes, substantial financial compensation for our client and other affected families. Wilson's face went pale. That's completely unreasonable. My clients will never agree to those terms. Marcus stood up. Then we'll see you in court, Mr. Wilson. The lawsuit was filed the following Monday. Sarah had worked around the clock to prepare a comprehensive complaint that named Morrison, Jenkins, and Rodriguez individually, as well as the HOA and its management company. The 47-page lawsuit detailed months of systematic harassment and discrimination. It included Marcus's meticulous documentation, witness statements from neighbors, and expert analysis of the HOA's selective enforcement patterns. The media coverage intensified after the lawsuit was filed. National news outlets picked up the story, and Marcus's original video gained another 100,000 views. Civil rights organizations issued statements supporting Marcus's case. More significantly, the federal government took notice. The Department of Justice announced that it was opening its own investigation into discrimination practices at Willowbrook Estates. This meant that even if Marcus won his individual lawsuit, the HOA could face additional federal charges. The pressure on Morrison, Jenkins, and Rodriguez became overwhelming. Neighbors who had previously been afraid to speak out started asking questions at HOA meetings. Several homeowners called for the board members to resign. The breaking point came when local media discovered that Rodriguez had been arrested for drunk driving the week after his confrontation with Marcus. The arrest report showed that Rodriguez had alcohol in his system at twice the legal limit, supporting Marcus's claim that Rodriguez had been drinking during their backyard confrontation. Jenkins faced his own problems when a former police colleague came forward with allegations of racist behavior during their time working together. The colleague, Detective Maria Gonzalez, told reporters that Jenkins had routinely made inappropriate comments about minority suspects. Morrison tried to maintain his position, but his own past caught up with him. A civil rights group publicized records of excessive force complaints from his police career, including an incident where he had been suspended for 3 days without pay. The HOA's insurance company finally lost patience with the situation. They informed Wilson that they would not provide coverage for the 3 board members in their individual capacities, meaning Morrison, Jenkins, and Rodriguez would have to pay their own legal fees and any damages awarded to Marcus. Faced with potential financial ruin and continuing media scrutiny, the 3 men made a decision that surprised everyone. Instead of fighting the lawsuit, they chose to resign from the HOA board and leave Willowbrook Estates entirely. Morrison was the first to go. He put his house on the market and moved to Florida within a month of Marcus filing the lawsuit. Jenkins followed 2 weeks later, relocating to Texas where he had family. Rodriguez held out the longest, but eventually sold his house and moved to a different state. The mass exodus of the 3 board members sent a clear message throughout Willowbrook Estates. The era of intimidation and selective enforcement was over. Marcus's neighbor, Tom Bradley, was elected to replace Morrison as HOA president. His first act was to rescind all violation notices that had been issued in the past year and implement new procedures to ensure fair enforcement of community rules. That the new board also hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day HOA operations. removing the temptation for board members to abuse their authority. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with just driving out the 3 men who had harassed him. He wanted to make sure this situation never happened again to any family, anywhere in the country. 6 months after the confrontation in his backyard, Marcus stood in the same spot where Morrison, Jenkins, and Rodriguez had tried to intimidate him. But everything had changed. His grandchildren were playing on their swing set without any fear of being watched by hostile men in cars. His neighbors waved and smiled when they saw him. Willowbrook Estates had become the peaceful community he had hoped for when he first moved there. The legal victory had exceeded even Marcus's expectations. Although Morrison, Jenkins, and Rodriguez had fled the neighborhood, they couldn't escape the lawsuit. The court case proceeded without them, and Marcus won a default judgment that included substantial financial damages. The HOA's insurance company paid Marcus $275,000 in compensation for the harassment and discrimination he had endured. More importantly, the court ordered the HOA to implement comprehensive reforms that would prevent future discrimination. A federal monitor now oversaw all HOA activities for 5 years. Every violation notice had to be approved by an independent review board that included civil rights experts. The HOA was required to provide annual civil rights training for all board members and staff. The new procedures were already showing results. In the 6 months since the reforms were implemented, violation notices had dropped by 80%, and they were being issued fairly across all demographic groups. The days of selective enforcement were over. Marcus used his settlement money to establish the Thompson Civil Rights Defense Fund, a nonprofit organization that provided legal assistance to homeowners facing discrimination from HOAs across the country. Within 6 months, the fund had helped 12 families fight similar cases in 8 different states. What happened to me wasn't unique, Marcus explained to a reporter from the Washington Post. HOA discrimination is a nationwide problem that affects thousands of minority families. But most people don't have the resources or knowledge to fight back effectively. The Thompson Defense Fund was filling that gap. Marcus hired 3 young civil rights lawyers and set up an office in downtown Minneapolis. They offered free legal consultations to homeowners who suspected discrimination and provided full legal representation in cases with strong evidence. The fund also created educational resources to help homeowners understand their rights. Marcus developed a handbook called Know Your Rights Fighting HOA Discrimination that was downloaded over 50,000 times in its first month of publication. Marcus's story had become a national symbol of successful resistance to discrimination. He was invited to speak at law schools, civil rights conferences, and community organizations across the country. His message was always the same. Knowledge, preparation, and persistence could overcome even the most entrenched discrimination. The viral video that started it all had been viewed over 2 million times. It became a training tool used by civil rights organizations to show people how to document harassment and stand up to intimidation. Law enforcement agencies used it to train officers about the proper boundaries of authority. But Marcus was most proud of the changes in his own neighborhood. Willowbrook Estates had elected its first diverse HOA board in the community's history. Tom Bradley remained president, but he was joined by Maria Santos, the wife of the Latino teacher who had spoken out after Marcus's case, and Janet Kim, whose family had been harassed about cooking smells. The new board focused on building community rather than enforcing arbitrary rules. They organized neighborhood barbecues, holiday celebrations, and children's activities. The atmosphere of fear and suspicion that Morrison and his friends had created was replaced by genuine neighborly cooperation. Marcus's house had become a gathering place for the community. Children from all backgrounds played in his yard. Parents stopped by to chat and ask for advice. Marcus had achieved his original goal of being the grandfather who was always available for his family. But he had also become a mentor and protector for his entire neighborhood. His daughter Lisa often brought her children over after school. 8-year-old Marcus Jr. and 6-year-old Sophia no longer had to worry about hostile men watching them play. They could be children without fear, which was exactly what their grandfather had fought to achieve. "Dad, do you ever regret moving here?" Lisa asked one afternoon as they watched the children play. Marcus considered the question seriously. "Lisa, I went through hell for the first 2 months. But look around us now. This is exactly the kind of neighborhood I dreamed of when I bought this house." Lisa smiled. The kids love coming here. They feel safe and welcome. That's all I ever wanted, Marcus said. A place where our family could be ourselves without apology. Marcus's son David visited regularly from the next city, often bringing his teenage daughter to spend weekends with her grandfather. David was amazed by the transformation in the neighborhood. "Dad, when I saw those 3 men confronting you at the barbecue, I was worried this would never work out," David said. "But you've turned this place into something special." Marcus looked around his backyard, where children of different races were playing together while their parents talked and laughed. "Son, sometimes you have to fight for what's right, but the fight is always worth it when you win." The impact of Marcus's case extended far beyond Willowbrook Estates. Civil rights lawyers across the country reported increased success in HOA discrimination cases, partly because Marcus's video had shown judges and juries exactly what harassment looked like. State legislatures began passing laws to strengthen protections against HOA discrimination. The federal government announced new enforcement initiatives targeting communities with patterns of biased rule enforcement. Marcus received letters from families who said his example had given them courage to fight their own battles against discrimination. A grandmother in Texas successfully challenged an HOA that tried to ban her from babysitting her grandchildren. A veteran in Florida used Marcus's documentation methods to expose selective enforcement in his community. The 3 men who had tried to drive Marcus away were living with the consequences of their actions. Morrison's house in Florida went into foreclosure when he couldn't afford the legal fees from the lawsuit. Jenkins was working as a security guard in Texas, a significant step down from his former position as an HOA board president. Rodriguez had moved in with relatives and was reportedly struggling to find work. Marcus felt no satisfaction in their downfall. "I didn't want to destroy those men," he told a journalist. "I just wanted them to stop destroying other people's lives." On the anniversary of his confrontation with the 3 former cops, Marcus hosted a community celebration in his backyard. More than 60 neighbors attended, including several families who had moved to Willowbrook Estates specifically because they heard it was now a welcoming community. Tom Bradley, the new HOA president, gave a speech thanking Marcus for his courage. "Marcus Thompson didn't just fight for his own rights," Bradley said.
"He fought for all of our rights to live in a community based on respect rather than fear." Marcus responded with characteristic humility.
"I didn't do anything special. I just refused to let bullies win. That's something any of us can do when we're faced with injustice." As the celebration continued into the evening, Marcus sat on his back porch, watching his neighbors enjoy themselves. Children ran around the yard while adults talked and laughed. The scene was exactly what he had envisioned when he first moved to Willowbrook Estates. His phone buzzed with a notification from the Thompson Civil Rights Defense Fund. Another family had contacted them for help fighting HOA discrimination in Oregon. Marcus smiled and made a note to have his lawyers contact them first thing Monday morning. The fight for justice never really ended, Marcus knew. There would always be another Morrison, another Jenkins, another Rodriguez trying to use their authority to hurt innocent people. But now there was also the Thompson Defense Fund, and a network of lawyers and activists ready to fight back. Marcus looked up at the stars appearing in the darkening sky. At 73 years old, he had achieved something remarkable. He had turned a personal attack into a movement for change. He had transformed a hostile neighborhood into a genuine community. He had shown the world that even the most entrenched discrimination could be defeated by courage, intelligence, and persistence. Most importantly, his grandchildren could grow up knowing that their grandfather had fought for their right to live anywhere they chose without fear or apology. That legacy was worth every moment of the battle he had endured. Marcus Thompson had won much more than a lawsuit. He had won the future.